They say time heals all wounds. But inside the grand walls of Kensington Palace, some memories never fade. There's a quiet corner in one of its gardens, where every year, a single white rose is placed beneath Diana's statue. Few know who leaves it. Fewer still understand the message it carries. But for those close to the royal family, it's more than just a tribute. It's a reminder of a promise made decades ago, and a legacy that continues to shape the hearts of Princes William and Harry even today. Because sometimes, the past doesn't rest in peace. It lingers, whispering through corridors of history and in the tears still shed for the people's princess. If Diana's story still touches your heart, you're not alone. Before we uncover this emotional royal truth, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold royal stories, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can change the world. Now, let's step behind the palace gates and into a story the cameras never showed. There's a corner of Kensington Palace gardens that tourists rarely notice. It's quiet there, far from the crowds, tucked behind the grand fountains and sculpted hedges. The air feels different, softer, almost reverent. It's the White Garden, created in memory of Princess Diana, a place where every petal tells a story and every breeze carries her name. It began, not as a public monument but as a deeply personal promise. When Prince William was just 15, standing at his mother's funeral, he vowed something silently, something the cameras couldn't catch. He promised he'd never let the world forget who she truly was, not just a princess but a woman who loved people more than protocol. That quiet vow became a seed, and years later it would bloom, right here. The White Garden wasn't always this peaceful. The first time it was designed, the gardeners said they could feel the emotion in every conversation about it. They weren't just planting flowers, they were building memory. Every tulip, every white rose, every forget-me-not was chosen because it meant something. White, for purity. Forget-me-nots, Diana's favorite. And roses, well, those were for love, the kind that outlives a lifetime. When the garden finally opened to the public in 2017, something extraordinary happened. On the morning before its unveiling, a palace guard reported seeing a young man, hooded, quiet, laying a single white rose beneath the statue. Security footage was blurred and no name was ever confirmed. But within hours, whispers spread through palace staff. Could it be William? No one ever asked him directly, but those who knew him say the answer didn't need words. To this day, William visits the garden quietly, often without the cameras. Sometimes Catherine joins him, sometimes it's just him, standing near the pond, hands folded, lost in thought. A royal staffer once described seeing him there after hours. He doesn't say much, just looks at the statue, then at the flowers. It's like he's having a conversation only he can hear. And perhaps he is, because that garden isn't just for the public. It asks for the sons she left behind. A place where duty fades and memory speaks. But behind that beauty lies a pain the world rarely sees. For William, the garden is both comfort and reminder. Every blossom whispers what could have been, the laughter they might have shared, the advice she would have given, the grandmother she never got to be. He once told a friend quietly, "Every big moment, I think of what Mom would have said. The garden helps me remember her voice." It's that voice, her kindness, her empathy, that still guides his steps. And it's why the White Garden remains untouched by time. Even now, when royal events are planned, there's an unspoken rule. No large gatherings there. No political speeches. Only silence, flowers, and memory. But the true heart of this story lies in a moment the public never saw. In 2021, just before the statue unveiling, William and Harry met privately in the garden, away from reporters, away from protocol. It was their first quiet reunion in months. For a brief moment, two brothers, divided by distance and headlines, stood side by side again. Eyewitnesses said it wasn't a public handshake that mattered that day, but a small thing, a glance. A look that said, "We still remember her the same way." That's the power of Diana's garden. It bridges what words can't. Many who visit the White Garden describe feeling a strange calm. Some say the air there feels warmer, others that birds seem to linger longer. One gardener even joked, "It's like she's checking our work." But perhaps it's not a joke at all. Because for the royal staff, the garden is alive with her spirit, and it continues to remind everyone within Kensington's walls of what compassion truly looks like. A former palace maid once shared, "When Diana lived here, she'd sneak into the kitchens at night just to chat with us. She made you feel seen. Now when we walk past the white garden, it feels like she's still here, smiling somewhere nearby." There's something almost cinematic about the way time folds inside that garden. A young boy's grief, a mother's legacy, and the man that boy became, carrying both the crown and her memory. William once described parenthood as the moment his mother's lessons came back to him. "I feel her more now than I did before," he said. "I think she'd be proud, and probably laughing at how much I've become like her." That's what makes this story so human. Because beneath the royal titles, the centuries of tradition, and the endless scrutiny, lies something pure, a son's love for his mother. And the garden stands as proof that grief doesn't end, it transforms. Every spring, when the flowers bloom again, Kensington's gardeners receive a handwritten note. It simply reads, "Thank you for keeping her light alive."
No one knows who sends it. Some suspect Catherine. Others, perhaps one of the palace staff who served Diana long ago. But maybe it doesn't matter, because the message speaks for all of them, and for everyone who ever saw Diana not just as a princess, but as a person. In the end, the promise in the garden is more than a tribute. It's a living reminder that love, once planted, never dies. And somewhere inside Kensington Palace, under the watch of the statue, a vow still breathes quietly in the breeze. "You'll never be forgotten, Mom." There's a quiet ache that lingers beneath the grandeur of royal life, the kind that doesn't make the headlines but echoes in the silences between brothers. For Prince William and Prince Harry, that ache began on a single devastating day, September 6, 1997, when two young boys walked behind their mother's coffin while the world watched in tears. That image is etched into history. But what the cameras didn't capture was a promise both boys made in their hearts that day, a promise that would later pull them in two very different directions. For William, grief turned into duty. He was the elder, the heir, the one who had to smile through heartbreak and stand straight even when the weight of loss nearly crushed him. The world expected him to become the image of royal strength. For Harry, grief became rebellion. He wasn't next in line to the throne, and that gave him something his brother could never have: freedom. But freedom, when built on loss, can be a lonely road. Both brothers loved their mother fiercely, but they carried her legacy differently. William chose to honor her through stability and service, following her compassion while protecting the institution she once challenged. Harry, on the other hand, chose to live her truth, unfiltered, emotional, and at times defiant against the very system that hurt her. And yet, both paths trace back to her heart. People forget that Diana was both royal and rebel, gentle and strong. She wanted her boys to have empathy before privilege, to see the world not from palace balconies, but from hospital wards, orphanages, and war zones. So when William took his first royal tour with Catherine, visiting charity for children, it wasn't just protocol, it was instinct. He was walking in his mother's footsteps. And when Harry later held the hand of a wounded soldier in Africa, wiping away tears without a camera script, he was doing the same. Different continents, different choices, same mother's love. Over the years, the distance between them grew. Headlines called it a rift, but insiders often said it was less about anger and more about pain. Pain that one brother chose to contain, and the other chose to confront. A palace aide once said softly, "William grieves privately, Harry grieves loudly, but both still grieve." And that simple truth explains more than any headline ever could, because Diana's legacy didn't just give them compassion, it gave them conscience. One expressed it through the crown, the other through conversation. And somewhere between those two roads lies a reflection of who she truly was. In 2019, during a rare interview, Harry said something that revealed just how much her influence still shapes his heart. "I feel her presence in almost everything I do, especially when I'm protecting my family. It was a small line, easily overlooked. But for those who listened closely, it was loaded with meaning, because in those words, you could hear the echo of Diana herself, the woman who fought against royal convention to protect her boys at any cost. And in that same year, William, when asked about his mother's memory, said quietly, "She taught us that emotions aren't weakness. They're human. Two brothers, two philosophies, but one message. Even when they disagreed, they were still, somehow, speaking her language." There's a poignant moment many royal watchers remember, the unveiling of Diana's statue in 2021. Cameras captured smiles, polite words, a public show of unity. But what they didn't capture was the brief exchange after the ceremony, away from the microphones. An insider described it like this: "They both just stood there, looking at her face cast in bronze. Neither spoke for a long while. Then Harry whispered something, and William nodded. No one knows what was said, but it was clear. Beneath all the noise, their mother still connects them in ways the world will never fully see. Diana's love was always unconditional, and maybe that's why her memory refuses to fade. It's the invisible thread that keeps her sons tied to her heart, even as their paths stretch oceans apart. William, now a father himself, has said he sees glimpses of her in his children. George has her curiosity, Charlotte her cheekiness, and Louis her energy. Harry, too, speaks of her to his children, Archie and Lilibet, telling them about Grandma Diana, who, as he once said, made people feel like they mattered. And when you hear both brothers talk about her that way, you realize something beautiful. Though they may walk different roads, they're both still walking her path. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that they chose different lives, but that the world keeps trying to choose for them. Because Diana raised them not to be perfect princes, but feeling humans. And if that makes them emotional, outspoken, or even misunderstood, maybe that's exactly what she wanted. In the end, William and Harry are two halves of her story. One carries her grace in the palace halls. The other carries her courage in the world beyond. And both in their own ways are keeping her promise alive, the promise that compassion can outshine crowns. So when people ask, what would Diana think of her sons today? Maybe the answer lies not in royal statements or interviews, but in the quiet moments we never see, in the way William kneels to comfort a grieving family, in the way Harry wipes away tears while speaking about veterans. Because every time they lead with heart instead of hierarchy, you can almost hear her whisper, "That's my boys." The truth is, Diana never truly left them. She simply walked ahead, lighting two very different roads that both lead home. Every royal generation carries its own legacy, but for Princess Catherine, hers began long before she ever stepped through the palace gates. When she first met Prince William, she wasn't just walking into a love story. She was walking into a shadow, the enduring presence of a woman the world adored, Princess Diana. And while most people might have felt intimidated by that, Catherine chose something different. She didn't try to replace Diana. She chose to honor her, quietly, gracefully, and in ways so subtle that most people never even noticed. There's a saying among palace staff, Catherine speaks through actions, not words. And nowhere is that more true than in how she's carried Diana's memory. Not through grand speeches, but through gestures of the heart. Take her jewelry, for instance. Every time Catherine wears Diana's iconic sapphire engagement ring, that deep ocean blue stone that once graced Diana's hand, she's not just wearing royal heritage. She's wearing a connection between mother, son, and wife, a circle that time could never break. William once said he gave her that ring because it keeps his mother close to all of us. It's not just a symbol of love. It's a bridge between the past and the present. And Catherine wears it with a quiet pride, never flaunting, never forced, just respectful. But her tributes go deeper than jewelry. In 2015, during a visit to a children's hospice, a cause Diana championed, Catherine spent nearly an hour sitting on the floor beside a young boy too shy to speak. She didn't rush, didn't pose for cameras, didn't even look around to check who was watching. When the child finally smiled, the photographer later said, "You could almost see Diana in her." Moments like that never make the front page, but they're the heartbeat of her legacy, proof that kindness doesn't need a microphone to be felt. Then came 2017, the 20th anniversary of Diana's passing. The world looked to William and Harry, expecting speeches, tears, maybe even a reunion. But it was Catherine who made the most tender statement of all without saying a word. On that summer day, she dressed in soft floral white, the same shade Diana had worn during her final visit to the palace gardens. And as she arrived, she carried a small bouquet of white forget-me-nots, Diana's favorite flowers. She laid them gently by the statue, bowed her head, and stepped back. No press release, no public statement, just silence and sincerity. A palace insider later said, "It was the kind of tribute Diana would have loved, quiet, personal, from the heart." But Catherine's connection to Diana isn't just symbolic, it's deeply maternal. In the way she raises her children, echoes of Diana can be seen everywhere. Catherine insists her children have as normal a life as possible. School runs, home-cooked meals, muddy playtime in the garden. No royal stiffness. When asked once about family time, she said, "We want our children to grow up feeling loved, not watched." That simple line captures exactly what Diana once said, that she wanted her boys to know love is not something you measure in titles, but in moments. It's as if Catherine took that message and built her motherhood around it. There's a story that rarely gets told, about a night when Catherine, William, and their children watched old family footage of Diana with the boys. It wasn't for publicity or nostalgia, just something William wanted the kids to see. Catherine later told a friend that little Charlotte pointed at the screen and said softly, "That's Granny Diana, isn't it?" William smiled, and Catherine said the room fell silent after that. Just for a moment, a silence filled with both sadness and gratitude. That's the quiet kind of legacy Diana left, one that doesn't end when the cameras fade. And perhaps what's most powerful about Catherine's tributes is how natural they are. She doesn't imitate Diana. She reflects her, not by copying her fashion, but by continuing her mission, compassion without condition. When she hugs a child, when she kneels to speak eye level with a grieving mother, when she comforts a veteran's wife, you can see the thread of empathy that connects her heart to Diana's. It's no wonder the public often calls Catherine the modern heartbeat of the monarchy, because she reminds people that royal duty can still feel human. But there's another side, one the world rarely sees. Behind closed doors, Catherine carries the weight of comparison. Every gesture she makes, every smile, every glance, measured against a legend. And yet, she never complains. A close friend once revealed, Catherine doesn't see Diana as competition. She sees her as inspiration. She believes Diana's light guides all of them, especially the children. That belief drives her. It's why every year on Diana's birthday, the family sets aside a private hour. No press, no palace schedule, just remembrance. The children are told stories about the grandmother they'll never meet, but whose kindness still shapes their home. In many ways, Catherine has become the emotional anchor of the modern royal family. Calm, composed, but always quietly radiant. And that's perhaps the greatest tribute of all. Not trying to replace the people's princess, but becoming the people's duchess in her own right. One who understands that the truest legacy isn't in grandeur, but in gentleness. Every smile, every quiet act of empathy, every small reminder of Diana. Catherine has turned them into a living continuation of the compassion that once transformed the monarchy. Because sometimes the loudest love is the kind that never needs to be said out loud. When people ask, does Diana still live on inside Kensington Palace? The answer doesn't come from portraits or statues. It comes from the way Catherine walks beside her husband, raising their children in warmth, humility, and quiet grace. Through her, Diana's legacy breathes. Through her, those lessons of love still bloom. And through her, the palace feels just a little more human again. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 4, The Legacy That Still Brings Tears, 1,000 Words? Next, this chapter will serve as the emotional finale, reflecting on how Diana's spirit continues to influence the royal family, the palace, and the people she touched, even decades after her passing. Time softens memories, but some hearts, no matter how royal, never stop remembering. Inside Kensington Palace, Diana's presence lingers not as a ghost, but as a gentle light. You feel it in the quiet moments, the laughter of her grandchildren echoing down the old corridors she once walked, the scent of white roses drifting from the garden she inspired, the way her son still glanced upward before important moments, as if seeking her silent blessing. Because even after all these years, Diana's spirit isn't a chapter closed. It's the story still being written. For William, that story lives in how he leads, differently, humanly. He once said, "Mum taught me that being royal is about helping others feel they belong." That lesson shapes nearly every public moment he shares with Catherine. The easy smiles, the comforting hand on his shoulder, the quiet empathy that never feels staged. At charity visits, when William kneels down to talk to a child rather than towering above them, people often whisper, "That's Diana's son." And they're right, because Diana wasn't born royal. She became beloved because she made people feel seen. And now, through William, that same warmth lives on. For Harry, her legacy burns brighter in the freedom he fights for. He often says he feels her guiding him every step of the way. And whether the world agrees or not with his choices, stepping away from royal duty, protecting his family from public chaos, it's impossible to miss the echo of Diana's defiance in him. She too once walked away from the palace walls to reclaim her peace. And in that sense, Harry's journey isn't rebellion, it's reflection. The compassion that drove her to hold the hands of AIDS patients in the 80s, when few dared to, is the same compassion Harry shows when he comforts wounded veterans or speaks about mental health with raw honesty. Different eras, same courage, a mother's heart reborn in her son. But perhaps the most profound continuation of her legacy lives in the next generation, the children she never got to meet. Little Prince George carries her curiosity. He asks endless questions, just as Diana did. Princess Charlotte, bold and cheeky, has her sparkle. Even palace staff joke she's the one who would have wrapped Diana around her finger. And Prince Louis, playful and uninhibited, carries her joy, that mischievous grin that once melted the formality of royal photos. William once said that telling his children about Granny Diana feels like introducing them to a star, distant, yet always shining. He said she'd be the best grandmother, loud, loving, probably spoiling them rotten. That line made Catherine laugh and made the world's eyes mist over. Because it's true, Diana's story never ended. It simply changed form. Every few months, when the palace gardens are trimmed and refreshed, one tradition remains untouched. A single white rose, always laid at the base of her statue. No name, no ceremony, just a quiet act of love. Visitors sometimes see it and pause. Some smile, others tear up, because even strangers feel that strange, emotional connection to her, as if she still speaks across decades, whispering the same message she once lived by. You don't need to be perfect to be kind. And that's why, even now, Diana's story still brings tears to Kensington Palace. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for the woman who changed what it meant to be royal, for the mother who raised sons to feel, not just to reign, and for the legacy that continues to soften one of the hardest, oldest institutions on earth. There's an often overlooked truth about Diana. She didn't break royal traditions out of rebellion. She did it out of love. She didn't hug sick children for cameras. She hugged them because she felt their pain. She didn't step in front of mines in Angola to make headlines. She did to prove courage comes in compassion's clothing. And perhaps that's why, decades later, she remains unmatched. Because Diana didn't just change the monarchy. She humanized it. Even the palace itself seems to remember her. Guards still tell stories of how she'd sneak them tea on cold nights. Gardeners recall how she'd walk barefoot on the grass, laughing with her boys, breaking every rule with a smile that disarmed them all. And every Christmas, staff say, the mood inside Kensington softens, because that's when the memories come strongest. She made this place feel alive, one longtime attendant once said. Now, when we see the children running down the hall, it feels like she's watching over them. In 2021, during the unveiling of her statue, Williams said words that summed up everything her legacy stands for. We remember her love, her strength, and the character that made her an incredible mother. And as the sunlight broke through the clouds, hitting the bronze of her smile, a hush fell across the garden. Even nature seemed to pause for her. That's the kind of magic only true hearts leave behind. Today, every act of compassion by the royals, every hospital visit, every tear wiped, every hand held, carries a trace of Diana's soul. Her light has become a compass, quietly guiding them to serve with sincerity instead of ceremony. And so, though she's gone, she never really left. Because love like hers doesn't fade. It transforms. It becomes gardens, gestures, glances, and lessons whispered across generations. As the world keeps changing, as the crown evolves, as new faces rise and fall, one truth remains constant. There will never be another Diana. Not because no one can match her fame, but because no one can replicate her heart. Her legacy isn't in stone or speeches. It lives in people, in those she touched, those she inspired, and those who still feel her warmth every time they see kindness and power. When the cameras fade and the palace lights dim, there's a silence that fills Kensington. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The soft rustle of the white garden at night, the whisper of petals brushing in the breeze. And maybe, just maybe, that's her way of saying, I'm still here. Keep loving, keep caring, keep believing. Because in the end, Diana's story isn't just royal history. It's a reminder that love, once sown, blooms forever. Rose, rose. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below. Tell us what Diana's legacy means to you. And if her spirit still inspires you today, please subscribe, and share this video so her light can keep shining for generations to come. Because every view, every word, every tear keeps the promise alive. Sparkles, the people's princess, forever in our hearts. Sparkles,